I want to thank everybody taking the time to join us this morning and to welcome to a webinar today. So making it with the media, how to leverage your earned media to reach your sales targets and goals. We're very pleased to be joined by Drew Sherbin of Alchemy Communications to offer today's webinar as well as the other webinars in the series. And so Drew is the Director of Strategy and Communications, and he boasts a solid communication background and backed by extensive experience across various marketing and communications roles. So this webinar is being recorded, and I will be sending you a copy of the recording. So please welcome our speaker, Drew.
Perfect. Thanks, Anita, and thanks everyone for joining me today. So for today's topic, we're going to be talking, as Anita mentioned, sort of how we can leverage earned media to not only leverage and hit sales targets, but also kind of dovetails quite nicely into some of the stuff I've already been presenting, and that's just around getting out your brand awareness component, and then just basically connecting with your audience and your customers. So before we get started, I like to kick off the presentations with a land acknowledgement. So in the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, Alchemy Communications, as an inhabitant of Calgary, Alberta, honors and acknowledges Mohkinstsis and the traditional Treaty 7 territory and oral practices of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, as well as the Stoney Nakoda and Tsuut'ina nations. We also acknowledge that the territory we work and live upon is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3 within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. So as Anita mentioned, just a little bit about myself and Alchemy. So we're a full service PR agency based in Calgary. We do a lot of things from crisis communications to media relations, PR, social media management, whole different things. And we work with tons of different businesses across all different sectors. So a lot of not-for-profits, oil and gas companies, some entrepreneurs. So basically anything we've probably done in some form or fashion in the past. But yeah, glad to be here today talking a little bit more about sort of media and how we can leverage that component. So before we get started, I just want to kind of preface what in today's topic is really about earned media, and what that means is around the press release or pitching, or it's different than that sort of that paid media component. So sometimes you see obviously ads or advertorials, right? So content that looks like stories but are actually paid content. So today what we're going to be talking about is sort of those opportunities that result in whether it's a press release, direct pitching, or even just a relationship that you may have with members of the local media in your different jurisdictions. So basically today we're going to be covering a few points. We're going to be looking at understanding the importance of media pitching, learning how to sort of create and craft that compelling story, and then really looking into mastering the art of presenting to whether that's the newsroom, the journalist, and then in today's day and age, a lot of that is also considered an influencer, right? Whether that be on social or even in the media landscape as well. So just into the first point, when we're talking about understanding the importance of media pitching, what that really means is, finding that story or crafting that compelling story within the industry. So when we're talking about RVs and the RV Dealers Association and sort of your own sort of brand as individuals, what we're looking at is really crafting those stories that resonate uniquely within your landscape. So whether that's you're trying to carve out the niche in your market, or even in general as a whole, speaking about the industry, it's about conveying that information, and not only conveying it, but in a way that's sort of capturing the essence of your industry, right? There's a lot of things, and we talked about in our previous sort of webinars, was there's this whole lifestyle component around it, right? So the essence of adventure or thrill, exploration, getting out, hitting the road, things like that. So that's one thing that we can leverage when we're talking about media, is considering, finding those stories and using media as sort of the heartbeat of that successful public relations component. The second point too, and this sort of dovetails into the first about finding those compelling stories, is that you can really leverage media as a trust builder. So if for those who have joined previous webinars, that's a word that I use pretty much in all of them is trust. So establishing that trust within your community, and media is a really good way to help elevate that and kind of get that out there. So if you think of it as a way to sort of like an engine propelling your brand, media is just one component. So maybe a piston in that engine, right? So it's driving your visibility, your credibility, and really creating a positive impression across the audience, right? And then finally, finding that mastering the art. So what that really means is sort of understanding that it's not just about sending something out or issuing a release, or it's really about cultivating relationships as well. So one thing that I always say is if you may think you have a great story to tell, or maybe there's something you want to get out there, but one thing that I always do is it's a little exercise. You can just look out the window, and if there's someone on a busy street, you think, okay, well, how do I connect with them? How do I reach them? Right? I need them to care. So you need to sort of kind of think about that and finding different ways to make it unique and then connect with the audience on the sort of outside level. So one thing is connecting with media, obviously, to get them to tell your story, but how does that resonate with the audience? So this first question here is, what is media pitching? Like what does it mean? So I'm sure everyone has sort of has understood or read or kind of gets the basis of it, or there's some people who maybe pitch more often than not, but what it really is, it's about sort of, it's more than just reaching out, right? It's about strategic approaches to engaging not only journalists, editors, and influencers, but it's involves presenting them not only information, but those captivating stories that really resonate with your intended audience. So by doing this strategically, it's really about the linchpin of your PR strategy. So it acts as that powerful sort of conduit to sharing your dealer narrative with the wider audience. So the big thing when we're talking about media pitching, the role that it plays in public relations is that what it is, it's not just sort of a piece of the puzzle, but it's really the driver, right? It's that engine that, as I mentioned before, propels your dealership's brand visibility, the credibility, and the overall perception. So by strategically placing your stories in sort of influential media outlets, whether that's local publications or sort of niche publications, what that does is serves as that bridge to connect your voice to the consumer or the audience, right? So in essence, what it really is, it's becoming that force that shapes how your brand is perceived in the eyes of the community. So this goes, it all sort of relates into the work that you're doing on your social media, your presence that you're putting out there on your website. This is just really that driver of sharing your story, right? So this is where, sort of a lack of a better term, where the rubber hits the road. This is all that work you've done in the background. This sort of is, okay, we're pushing it, actively pushing it out to media outlets. So when we look at sort of the idea of what makes an effective media pitch, the biggest thing, and first and foremost, and this kind of goes back with the work that you've maybe been doing when you're looking at maybe enhancing your website or your social media presence or anything around brand awareness. In previous ones, we've talked about community engagement events, things like that. So what this is when we're talking about media pitching and outreach to media, it's really about finding those compelling stories, those ideas, those angles that would interest media, and then ultimately get them to cover your story or your dealership, right? Whatever angle you've presented, it should be strategic. Should be researched. It shouldn't just be a, hey, this is who we are, cover us sort of thing, right? So at the heart of what makes effective media pitching is that you're finding that compelling story, that idea, that angle. So this goes beyond maybe just information sharing or, hey, come check us out. I mean, that shifts depending on where you are in the life cycle of your business. If it's a, you know, introductory thing, then that might make sense. But if you're maybe connecting with audience in a way you've been around for a while, maybe you highlight some of your community initiatives or the impact that you've made on the community, or maybe the impact you tell a story about. It's more than just buying a vehicle, right? Or it's that exploration of the unknown. It's hitting the open road. It's connecting with like-minded individuals. It's finding that sort of community, right? So it's about creating that narrative that really resonates not only on a sort of emotional level, but also intellectually. So you can start to kind of sprinkle in the elements of the information as well. So whether it's in a sort of an adventure sort of angle, or maybe something unique to your dealership that you're a new initiative you're launching, maybe it's even in industry insight that's sort of maybe groundbreaking things that you're seeing. Why not you be the voice and leader of getting that out there to the media, right? So when you find these stories, it's really about the ability to captivate and set it apart. So what I mean by that is you're really creating sort of a catalyst for capturing the attention of your audience and the journalist's attention, the media outlet's attention as well. So make your pitch sort of like if you're taking notes, you can kind of encapsulate it by making your pitch memorable in a sea of information. So what sets you apart? So if you just maybe picture like a sea of all this information floating around, what's your kind of what's the buoy, right? Who are you bouncing above that sea, right? So what does that make you unique, or how does it make you unique? And then a big thing too, when we talk about finding your story, one thing that's equally is important is identify the right outlet. So if you're thinking, okay, well, you just need to connect with the local paper, radio station, TV station, whatever, that might be one thing. But also maybe there's, you know, blogs, other publications, things like that you can really leverage, and you might actually be hitting your audience targets more so than thinking we need to be front page of this paper. That sounds exciting. Like that's like, hey, we've really made it or whatever, but it's really about finding the outlet that works. So not just as, you know, everyone is diverse in industry and every dealership is unique in their own way. Media is no exception. So there's diversity in media. They each have their own audience and focus. So it's really about identifying those right outlets for your pitch. So it's basically anchored in strategy. As with everything, that's sort of as I mentioned in our webinar series, is there's a lot of background and strategic work that goes into to this. So one thing that I also like to say is there's a difference between being strategic and having a strategy. So everyone might have like a sales strategy or a communication strategy, media strategy, but sometimes when you're strategic, you recognize things, those ebbs and flows of sort of day to day. So it's really important to sort of have a pulse on what's happening with those media outlets and kind of developing those relationships as well. So one example, sort of maybe if you're finding a niche, maybe there's an RV enthusiast magazine or mainstream like lifestyle blogs that can connect with the audience that you're trying to reach. So yeah, the local or the well-known publication might be seemed to be like, oh, that's the one we want to connect with. Maybe if you connect with those other audience segments, it might make more sense, right? So it's really about finding that audience that matters most for your dealership or your whatever you're trying to get across, right? It's reaching beyond sort of that quantity and looking at the quality of the engagement. So as with all the presentations, if anyone has any questions, you feel free to throw them into the chat box, and we can we're going to save some space at the end for questions. So if you just want to throw them in there as we go, we can continue. Okay. And then the last point here is really it ties in sort of the idea about compelling stories and then the research behind identifying the outlets. So one thing that's really important, and the importance of this topic here, is that it's really good to personalize your pitches. So in the world of media pitching, one size doesn't necessarily fit all. So when we're talking about the importance of personalization, cannot be overstated. So tailoring your pitch is really about finding that publication, as mentioned before. Maybe there's a specific reporter or journalist that has been covering this stuff, and it has a interest in it, right? So it's about identifying and finding those people that you can leverage, because what you're doing is you're also leveraging their interests, right? You're tailoring it to something. If you can get them excited, then they're probably more than likely gonna cover it. So it's more than just maybe addressing them by name. It's about understanding, and this is sort of, again, back to that strategy. It's okay, so this person is, even a quick Google search, you can see they've covered a lot of these different topics, and it doesn't have to just relate to the industry. Maybe there's one who's been covering a lot of community engagement or community initiatives, things like that might fit into your strategy of how you're trying to connect with the audience as well, right? So what that does is, not only when you connect with them and you personalize the pitch, it captures their attention, but it also shows that you've done your homework. There's a level of respect there for their time. It's like, okay, well, Drew, he read my stuff. He sees that I'm interested in this. It's not just a sort of a release that's fired off with the hopes of getting media pickup. So when you do that, there isn't a likelihood of sort of your story or narrative being picked up, for sure. So when we look at earned media specifically and the benefits around that, one thing is cost. It doesn't come out of your advertising budget and things like that. So one thing that is huge around that is that it extends far beyond the dollars and cents. It really goes about earning that valuable coverage, that real estate, that land kind of in that media landscape, because everyone's sort of fighting for that. And the media is no different as well. So it's about earning that valuable coverage that puts your dealership, your initiative, maybe one of your staff has a compelling story to tell. It puts them in the spotlight, and then in turn connects with your audience, and then goes to connect the dots of all these topics I've been discussing. They all relate to, brand awareness. If there's a media story, you could post it on social, put it on the website, things like that. So it's all interconnected to the ultimate goal of enhancing your brand, and then ultimately getting people to visit, building up those sales, and reaching your targets in that capacity as well. So what this does is it all goes to sort of acting as a powerful sort of endorsement. So reaching your audience through those trusted channels, it elevates your brand within that community. So when we talk about sort of the second point about reaching that targeted audience, what it does is, when we're targeted and we're strategic and we know who we want to connect with, one of the advantages of this is its ability to reach that audience. And by strategically selecting sort of that right outlet or that journalist or that reporter or the outlets, when you're tailoring your pitches, it ensures that your message really resonates with those who matter most to you, right? So whether that's audience, whether that's, potential customers, current customers, members of the community, you're really tailoring your story to that group. So when you're targeted, it really maximizes the impact of the story that you're trying to tell. So it's not just your blanket key messages and, hey, come check us out. There's something sort of deeper to that. So the example, maybe you paint a picture of what it means to be part of the RVing community, right? So you tell the story, you paint a mind picture. So imagine hitting the road on a long weekend and and you're building that. So whether that's it, depending on the type of story you're doing, you really want to leverage the experience rather than just, hey, come check us out. We're here for you. Or you want to kind of tug at the heartstrings when we're talking about reaching those audience. So the more you can have sort of an impactful story when it comes to storytelling, it fosters a deeper connection, right? It's like someone reading that or seeing that, it's like, I've been thinking about buying an RV or getting into that. This is something that's making it easier for me to, take that that next step or that leap or, visit, or they've driven by your dealership on the highway every day, right? And it's like, okay, well, that story really connected with me. I'm going to go check it out or go in and see sort of what this is all about. So when you do that, you sort of you're generating a bit of a buzz, right? You're creating this excitement. So beyond the story, beyond the coverage, effective media pitching really has the power to generate this sort of underlying excitement or buzz within the community. So when you're looking at those compelling stories of those well-crafted pitches, it sort of has that ripple effect of enthusiasm. So when a story is published, there's enthusiasm within your dealership. It's, hey, check out this story, guys. And then you can share that with your audience. So that's that ripple, right? It's continuing on beyond your group. So when you become the topic of conversation, you're sparking interest, and there's this anticipation sort of, hey, did you see that? So it's driving this positive engagement of your brand. So when we look at sort of the reputation component in media, there's always this chance, and we talked about it with crisis communications planning, is that sometimes you might be on the reactive side of things, right? There could be usually, and I shouldn't say usually, but it's a negative tone of potentially the media story, right? So this is different than sort of the proactive side of things, but we always have to be mindful that when we're pitching, we're always kind of, while we're being proactive, we should be always thinking about managing that reputation. So when we're steering the narrative through well-crafted stories, and we sort of have a bit of an in with media and connection there, you have a hand in shaping how your brand is perceived, right? So when there's times of challenge, or if there's challenging times when we're talking about crisis, a positive media presence sort of becomes, think of it a little bit about like a shield, right? It helps to mitigate those potential reputational damages. So if you've had a general like positive experience, or you're showing those stories with media, it goes a long way to, again, there's that T word, that trust. So it helps to, maintain that trust from the audience. So when we talk about sort of this idea of pitching and we say earned media, it's really about earning the media coverage. So not just in the definition of paid versus earned or free or whatever, however you wanna say it. It's really about looking at it in a way. It's more than just securing a spot in the newscast or in the newspaper or a magazine or on their website, whatever. It's about strategically placing you or your dealership or whatever the focus of the story is putting that in the public eye through the story. And that's where we start to really talk about it being compelling. So it needs to be sort of, okay, why should I care, right? And there's a few different ways to do that. It's, again, painting those pictures, finding a unique story that maybe is unique to you or your dealership. Like I mentioned before, a longtime employee might have a really compelling story to share, things in the industry that you're seeing that are compelling. So it's really about finding those and then sharing them with the larger audiences. So successful media coverage it's not luck. It's not just sending it out and saying, oh, I hope they pick it up. It's really about, it's the outcome of sort of effective strategy, research. And this might sound daunting, and you might be thinking, Drew, well, we don't have time to, mine all these stories or whatever, but you'd be surprised how much stuff you might take for granted, maybe just being immersed in it. So it's just about finding those narratives that really resonate. So when we look at sort of the examples of what makes success in media coverage, some examples, sort of, as I mentioned before, it's about generating that buzz. So maybe there's stories that are really leveraging the experience, or the story of it's a compelling individual, or those are the ones that usually resonate the most. So when we look at sort of the examples around that, it's about finding those stories that are less about sort of, I guess, the product or the the physical thing, but it's about the connection that you'll make with the audience, right? And sometimes it's just you need to get the information out there, and that's more so along the lines of the crisis comm side of things, when maybe there's recalls or something that it's just okay, I just care about the information. But this is a little bit different. This is the fun side of it. This is about telling those why do you get pumped up to go to work every day? And that's a loaded question. I mean, we're not all always, we have our good days, bad days, but at the heart of it is, why are you doing this? I'm sure for some it's like there's joy when you see someone purchase a brand new RV, or that family that comes in and you see the little kids and they're smiling and pumped up to go out with their family and stuff like that. So it's about finding that connection as well. So when we talk about sort of that media coverage about increasing that brand visibility, it's sharing that, right? It's showing that that good feeling came from walking through the doors of your dealership, right? So it's about building that connection with community. So it's one thing that we can think of too. It's not necessarily just about, okay, we have a story in the media for that moment in time. They should all be building upon that collective or that continuous effort to really increase your brand visibility. So when we talk about sort of those targeted media connections or those stories, what you're doing is you're really, every story or every thing of coverage or whatever it may be, it's kind of being put on top of each other, and you're building up that recognizable presence, right? So it's not just one-offs. It's not just sort of, okay, we have a media story once a year. But if that's your goal, maybe that's yearly you try to build. But it's all, again, it should resonate and make sense to your audience, and as well as fit in with your realistic strategy of what you can complete as an organization. One thing that we often kind of, it's a bit of a trap, is that we feel that you need to we have to have this quantity maybe of we need to get this all done. If that makes sense, then yeah. But if it doesn't and you don't have the resources, then plan accordingly. Maybe one story a year is what you want to achieve after having nothing, right? So it's just about understanding your kind of how much you can actually realistically take this on as well. So this next slide is huge in terms of sort of tying everything together. And what it does too is it's sort of, this is the, again, I mentioned the term sort of linchpin a few times, but this is sort of the make or break sometimes of positive media versus negative media versus the media reputation, right? So when we talk about building credibility, it's really about the cornerstone of all your pitches. So it's not about just getting your name up there, but it's about becoming a resource or an authority or a trusted figure in the industry. So think of credibility as sort of that. Think of it like a currency, right? A currency that establishes you or your dealership as that reliable source of information and expertise. So it's really it's a tangible asset that goes beyond sort of the transaction of customers and audience. What it does is that currency is the trust currency. So you're building that, the more you can sort of put into that, so the credibility into your stories or your coverage, that's sort of the currency that you're playing with your audience. So when we look at sort of the role of reputable sources, or oftentimes if you're listening to the radio or reading a newspaper article or online or seeing something on TV, you sometimes see the trusted source, or this is the source, or here's our sources are telling us. So what does that mean? So what is the source? So when we're looking at sort of the idea of the reputable source, what that is that's sort of, again, it plays that pivotal role in boosting that trust or that credibility. So it's one thing to tell the story or the message, but when you have that source or that voice or that main character, I guess, in your story, what it does is it's think of it a bit of it like an endorsement, right? And an endorsement of you and your brand, your dealership, whatever it may be. So the more so when you can link that to sort of your status, it builds that credibility as a player in the industry. So whether it's journalists, influencers, whoever, they're more likely to engage trust with that dealership that is backed by reputable information or sources or stories or whatever that may be. So it's just one thing to keep in mind too, is that the more you can sort of build that credibility within the industry, that resonates, and that's no exception. That should really be kind of goes across all channels, whether it's social media or website as well. So media is no different. And then finally, when we can showcase examples of coverage from trusted media, it helps to build that trust. It's sort of like it's a cycle, it's a circle, right? So when you kind of jump into that media kind of wheel, think of it as a spinning wheel, it's a continuation, right? So the more you can sort of demonstrate that you're connecting and you're in media coverage, it builds to connect with the audience, and then in turn it connects with other maybe reporters or journalists or outlets, and then it's a cycle, right? So think of it, maybe you're featured in a national RV magazine and local media sees that and says, hey, our local business is featured here, and then that becomes the story too. So you're continuing this cycle of sort of that trusted sort of reputable source that you're being featured in other publications, that ultimately it makes people feel good. Maybe if you're in a smaller market and you're kind of hitting larger targets or areas, then that's a celebration, or that should be celebrated. Maybe there's a member of your team who's maybe achieved really great sales targets or something that is worth sharing, then that's something to be excited about as well. Okay. So we talked a little bit about the target audience and what that is. So I'm sure everyone sort of has an idea of who they're trying to connect with, right? Whether that's you can often use the same information that you use to develop sales targets or other targets for audience reach as well. But it's not really just about that mass visibility. It needs to be sort of strategic, and you need to be sort of strategic in connecting with that specific demographic that maybe matters most to you at that time. So maybe you're looking to connect with this certain segment of the population, or maybe you want to really connect with the people who are longtime customers. What does that look like? And media pitching often is an effective way to do that, right? So if you can sort of look at your pitches to maybe resonate with the interests, the preferences, the behaviors of that intended audience within that expansive sort of landscape of RV, that generalization of it, it really goes to hone in on who you're trying to connect with. So when you can tailor those pitches to that specific demographic, it really goes beyond, again, as I mentioned, that one size fits all. So it's really about understanding that nuances of your audience's wants, needs, their pain points, their pressure points, the things they're looking for. So sometimes when you're looking at reaching that audience, you need to align with their aspirations, their challenges, their preferences, whether it's crafting that pitch that maybe appeals to the adventurer, that audience, or maybe you're trying to really connect with families. Maybe you're trying to connect with retirees or whatever that may be, or people that are looking to embrace that lifestyle. It's about customizing that that message to resonate with whatever audience that you're looking to connect with. So when we talk about sort of understanding and connecting, you might think, Drew, that's great, but why? Like, who cares? What's the importance of, we want everybody to come in? So yeah, that could be a good thing to, obviously when we're talking sales, you want more volume quantity, but sometimes when you look at sort of understanding that underlying component to what drives a purchasing decision or an audience's decision, it's really central to reaching that audience. So it's about understanding who they are. And some of you've heard this before, and this isn't just in communications or media. It kind of goes with everything. It's a huge part of sales as well. So it's not really just about numbers, but it's really about understanding the motivations, the interests, as I mentioned before, the pain points, and understanding sort of how we can customize and guide, in this case, our media pitches to make them more impactful, to reach those audiences, and that ultimately you're creating that connection, that trust, right? So the more you can really intimately understand the audience, it's the more you can effectively tailor that message, that we can leverage media to help get that message out there. One thing I should say too is that you can sort of create this on your own and leverage it through your own channels, especially now with social media. Traditional media often uses social media as a guide and a way to cultivate their stories as well. So if you're putting this stuff on maybe your website or on your Facebook page or Instagram or whatever, and then maybe a journalist or an outlet sees it, that is just as effective as, picking up the phone or firing off an email or sending out a message to the media member. You're still connecting with them. So that's one thing to keep in mind as well. And that really just is a nice sort of segue into that buzz. Again, I talked about it before, sort of that idea of generating buzz. We want to get people pumped up. We want to get people excited. So that's essentially what the pitch is. You're taking your excitement and you're starting to share it with the audience, with media. So when we talk about generating buzz, it's more than just making noise, right? Being, oh, check this out, this is huge. It's more than that. It's about understanding that you want to show that genuine excitement or that concern or that care, or that why should people, give two hoots or whatever however you want to say it, is what you want to say is that it's not just about informing, but it's igniting that curiosity, it's sparking conversation, it's 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 anticipation, right? So an example of that, maybe when we're talking about maybe, seasoned enthusiasts, it's about, hey, that feeling when you hit the road or you're off for a week and you're just exploring. What does that feel like, right? So that's what you're trying to generate when we're talking about generating buzz. So it's about crafting narratives that go beyond just the who, what, where, when sort of thing you probably all heard when we're talking about media. It's about capturing that imagination of what that means to be a part of this community, right? Generate that buzz and share that buzz. Because like I said before, I'm sure you all have that different experiences and feelings that you can share with audiences that are ultimately potential or current customers. So when we look at sort of driving that interest and sales through the media coverage, and we talk about that buzzword or buzz generation, you're creating excitement that while it's fun, it's strategic. So if there's one thing you can take away from today's webinar, is that there's a lot of work behind the scenes that goes into making these fun, compelling stories. So just think about sometimes when you engage, right? When you watch TV, you read a news story, and it really gets you going. Or so whether that's good, bad, or whatever, it could be an emotional response, or it just, whatever it is, it connects with you, right? Emotion is the driver of that. So if you can think about how can we showcase innovative things in our industry that would elicit that same response, think about that when you're trying to tell your story. So if you can introduce, if there's different features or feelings that kind of resonate or come up, it goes a long way as well. So what you can also do is you can take that emotion and build it into things when you're talking about exclusive events or experiences or community engagement things. So when you're taking that idea of the buzz, the goal here is to infuse that element of excitement that reverberates throughout. So you can take something that's okay, yeah, it's just another event or another sale, but what can you take emotionally that drives it, right? That is like gets people excited. And sometimes you may think it's like, oh, that's sort of cheesy. It is sort of, at the end of the day, just an event or whatever, but you really need to kind of get that passion and show that. And the more you can sort of convey that and get pumped up about it, it'll resonate, right? So make them sort of like, if we can think about this idea of reverberation. So something, maybe it's percolating and it's kind of making its way around your dealership, and there's an excitement and buzz. How can we kind of send that out? So think of it as a speaker. How do we broadcast that out? How do we make that irresistible to media, where they sort of have to cover this, right? And I'm not saying that every story has to be like this crazy thing, right? Because sometimes that can be detrimental to your pitching. It's like, Drew, you're pitching everything at your dealership and it all feels like it's revolutionary, groundbreaking. Like, tone it down a bit, bud. But again, it's about understanding sort of, there's opportunities when you should be pushing out things that it's more than just the information. So when we talk about this buzz, we've done our research around sort of the audiences where we've connected with media. We've sort of looked at the stories we're telling. We're building out that reputation. We need to continue on, and there's a continuation of this when we talk sort of about that management of reputation. So when we talk about that, it's not about just reacting, as I mentioned before, to situations. It's about proactively building that foundation. And again, that sort of that currency that you have, that trust equity, if you want to call it that. What it does is it helps you to sort of influence how, when maybe stuff happens, that perception, how you're perceived within your RV community, the local community, whatever it may be. How are you sort of seen in that that group? So it's really about a deliberate effort to maintain that positivity, that positive image, that when things maybe go sideways, it aligns with sort of your values. So you're building on that with every sort of media outreach component that you have. So when we're talking about sort of proactiveness of this, so proactive pitching for reputation management, what it does is it's really about sort of anticipating potential things that could come up and then taking control of the conversation. So maybe if you're seeing a trend in the industry or things are dipping down, you can sort of maybe identify that ahead of time and then reinforce the values and your commitment to that. So maybe, for example, with maybe a dip in the economy, you can say you're reinforcing that, hey, we understand that it's times are tight for everyone, including our customers, where our values are part of this. There's a commitment to that. So if you can again bring in your key messages, your value propositions by strategically sort of leveraging and pitching your stories, you're continuing on, right? You're building those narratives. It's just not about reacting. So an example would be someone comes to you and say, you know, your industry is taking a huge hit. Can you comment? Well, if you've been always sort of preparing and building out messages for that, it's a lot easier to react to that. So when we're talking about sort of the narrative around industry or people or audiences, it's really important to also shape that narrative around you or your organization. So it's not about, sometimes when we hear the term like shaping the narrative, you think, okay, we're going to control. It's not about controlling the story. It's about really actively sort of participating in the genesis or the creation of this whole thing, right? Because you need to think of it this way, and this is usually more in line with crisis columns or crisis related stories, is that the story is going to come out regardless. It's how do you want to be involved in it? Do you want to be the no comment guy? Like sometimes usually it's like that makes the story, right? So you don't want to, I always say too, like you don't want to be in a position where you're creating your own weather or you become the story, right? We always see these viral clips of maybe people like flipping out at an interview or on an interview or whatever, and 9 times out of 10 the audience forgets what the original story was, but they just key in on did you see that guy's reaction or whatever it was, right? So it's really about sort of being a participant and how do you want to be involved in that creation or that genesis of the story. So when we're talking about media pitching and that management of reputation, it's really about a platform to showcase a multitude of different things. So you can showcase achievements, community and engagement or involvement, maybe a commitment to, whether it's, maybe you hear the term like a commitment to excellence or a commitment to whatever, that's more than just words, right? If you can constantly and continually live that or pitch that out, it's really an opportunity to tell that authentic story. And in doing so, it influences sort of how your organization is perceived by, in this case, the journalist, right? So, and then when you sort of, there's that perception with them, there's a perception amongst their audience and the broader community. Okay, about 15 minutes. This is going to wrap up my rambling discussion, and we're going to open it up to a few questions that we have in a bit here. But I just want to kind of wrap up my portion of it by saying that this isn't like a make or break thing and saying that you have to all, okay, well, I want everyone to have 5 stories in the media or whatever. It should always, and again, with all my presentations, it's what makes sense for you or your organization at that time. If it just doesn't make any sense to try and engage media, and it could actually maybe be harder or more difficult, then don't, right? Like there's probably other things that you could or should focus on. These are just like tips or things that you can do when you're ready to take that step within sort of the broader idea of getting your message out there. So when we're talking about effective media pitching, you really need to think about it as with anything. Like there's sales is an art, right? Like everything is an art form, right? So media pitching is no different, and it's about learning from it. It's about growing with it. So when you're really about wanting to sort of, I guess, master it, or not even master, but just get more comfortable with it, it's about incorporating a few key things. So one thing, if you write anything down, it's about finding that story, that give a S thing, right? So why would Buddy on the street, if you look out the window from my previous example, why would they care? So finding that and then seeing what the immediate attention is. So when you can do that, it goes a long way. And then personalization of your pitch to the journalist or the whoever you're connecting with, connect with them. Say, hey, I saw you're a you have an RV yourself, or I saw you, maybe you even know them from a sales opportunity, right? You know that they're a reporter. Well, like leverage that as well. So the way you can more, I guess, be timely and staying attuned within the connections that you're making, it goes a long way as well. So a few things that we're talking about, I guess the do's and don'ts. When we're talking about media pitching specifically, is that I'm going to list off the do's first, and then we'll kind of get into the don'ts. But the big thing is that what you want to do is tailor your pitches. So tailored pitches are the preference of media these days. So the more you can kind of connect, and almost like you're setting it up where they like, you have to cover this, or you've done a little research, it goes a long way than just the email that's to your own address, and then you can tell it's BCC or whatever, and it's the same pitch. If you can take time to target it to an individual or an organization, it goes a long way. Be clear and concise. So whatever that story may be, just make sure you're hitting the meat of the message that you're trying to get out there. So whether it's information, make sure you're using terms that would relate to the general public. If it's more of an experience, maybe you leverage that, but make it understandable, and build relationships. So it's not just about sending it to media. It's about connecting with maybe the journalist. It's not a one-off transaction. It's the same as sales in some cases, right? It's about building that lasting relationship with that reporter, that publisher, the editor, whoever it may be. And then stay informed. Part of your own homework is sort of understand what's happening within the industry. And if it's sort of sparking excitement within you, and you're thinking, hey, more people need to know about this, or this is really cool, then you can almost take it on as the expert, or you're pitching it out to media, and you're getting it out there. You're sort of aligning it with your current interests and needs, right? Now, some of the don'ts. Don't use that one size fits all approach, as I mentioned. So avoid sending sort of generic emails, pitches. Tailor those pitches to specific recipients and outlets. Sorry, I'm in a sort of common area at my work, and there's a bunch of daycare kids walking by, but don't know if you can hear that. But And then finally, or not finally, one of the steps too is don't overwhelm with information. So keep your pitches focused and avoid overwhelming the reporter with too much information, right? If you're saying that if you rattle off a whole bunch of maybe industry specific trends or standards, they might just think, oh, this is too much. But if you can key in on a few things, it makes it a lot easier to digest. Don't neglect follow-up. So following up on your connections or your pitches is good, but do so judiciously, right? Respect their time and schedule. So sometimes I find people take it too far and they just keep hounding, right? It's like, are you going to cover it? Did you get my email? Did you see my pitch? Da da da. That could be a detrimental kind of engagement as well. So, and don't forget finally that value proposition. So all sides value of the story that you're bringing to the audience, right? What sets your sale or that sales pitch, I guess you can call it, for lack of a better term, what sets that apart, right? What is making it different? Okay. And then finally, too, sort of the do's and don'ts. Don't just maybe media pitch for the sake of media pitching. And then, yeah, just have fun with it. That kind of goes into the do's. Okay, I'm going to open it up to questions. So if you can put some of your questions maybe in the chat, or Anita, if you want to open up the mics, we can have a conversation. But thanks again for another engaging session today.
Thank you, Drew. Yes, like you said, if you have any questions, please drop it into the chat right now.
And then here's just
Oh,
another, I just put the slide up here about my contact info if you just want to send me the question, but
I have actually, I have a question as well. I don't know if large media tour is still common nowadays. So how, is
yeah,
that, do you wait for somebody to come to you with that? I understand it requires a
yeah,
lot of resources and time to organize, and what in this day and time, what are the
sure.
benefits per se?
No, that's a really good question. So if we're talking about sort of, yeah, like invite media in for a tour or like a media day or whatever, I guess when you do that, it always has, it still use those components of why you're doing it. So it still needs to have sort of that compelling angle around the reason for the tour. So it is still a good way, especially if it's visual, if you're really wanting people to see and experience and get in there and see that experience, then that's definitely still a good way to do that. But again, with anything, whether it's just a written interview or if you're inviting them down or whatever it may be, you still need to make sure that there's a compelling angle or reason for them to be there. Because if you don't have that, and it's even if it's a tour, they might come down and be like, what are you showing? You're wasting my time. Like, you don't want that to be the angle either, right? And I know it's probably not, but the more you can kind of find those fun things or those exciting things to share, it goes a long way. What if it's a tour or just an interview, whatever it is. All right. Not seeing any questions.
Yeah, well, everyone's waiting. If you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit about our upcoming, our final webinar in the series, and I just dropped the registration link in the chat. If you could talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Did you just, I don't have my, I'm sharing my screen. I don't have the top. Can you just remind me on the topic again? I know it was a reschedule of
It's
one of the
on
ones.
becoming a thought leader, how to
Yeah.
increase your brand awareness by leveraging your expertise on social media.
Yeah. So essentially this one is a good one and it goes into all the components of the topics I've talked about before. So not only I know it's going to be, we talk about leveraging social, but you can also leverage this for media. And what the next one is going to be is really about identifying and finding that sort of your niche or your role, and then becoming that thought leader on whether it's industry or even just maybe a leader in the community. So how do you sort of take your expertise or your knowledge, and how do you leverage that to connect with your audience? So that's going to be the topic of the next one.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. And I look forward to seeing you at our next session on November 29th. And thank you, Drew.
Yeah, thank you.
Please,
We'll see you on the
please reach
29th.
out to us with any questions or comments you have. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.